Well, hello, everybody. Today I wanted to speak to you concerning your biology course and really how to study for a biology course. And so I've decided throughout the years of looking at really how students study for a science course, I decided to create a PowerPoint, really, to create a presentation on some handy tips and some guideline on how you actually study for a science course. And I think these are going to be really important and really crucial for you, not only for this course and not only for sciences, but in the future. And I'm going to talk about this, really how this impacts not only this course, but your future. And so I really wanted to first start off and talk about really some of the things that you are really supposed to get out of this course, and really in particular a science course. Of course, at the beginning of this semester, we talk about really the course syllabi, right? So we actually look at a syllabi for whatever course you're taking. This might be, you might be taking an A&P course for this semester, or a general biology course for this semester, even physics or chemistry, or even a microbiology class. But every instructor that you take for these courses really discuss the course syllabus. These are the recommendations, these are the guidelines, the policies, the procedures, the rules involved in this course. And one of the things that we really stress is looking at the learning objectives, really. And really what the learning objectives are all about, or what is the knowledge that you are supposed to gain in this course at the end of the semester. And so I always talk about these and stress these points, that they're really important to look at, because that's what you really are trying to grasp at the end of this course. What you're really trying to get out of this course in terms of either gaining more knowledge or even mastering this information. So the learning objectives are really, really important. That's what you're really trying to get out of this course. But the second thing that I think most students don't realize, and what these courses are trying to do, is really get you some really important skills, right? These skills are what I really want to concentrate on today. These skills, for example, when studying, are going to help you to be more proficient and really to be a lifelong learner. And hopefully by the end of this course, you'll understand what that really means, right? So kind of stepping back, I wanted to kind of talk about where many students come from. And where we really come from is a place called secondary education. And what is really secondary education? This is the time frame between elementary school on one end after 6th grade and before college. So this is really between 7th grade and 12th grade, right? And that's what we're really looking at. That's what we really talk about when we call about secondary education, right? And so when we look at secondary education, where many of our students come from, we look at what kind of challenges or challenges at all students are presented with between this grade frame, right? And so we look at a couple things here, right? And so the first one we're looking at here is reading. When we look at reading, we find that students, and in many of these school districts, really are minimal, right? So reading is somewhat of a minimum. Now, again, this is a generalized statement. Different school districts can stress this a little bit more than others. But for the most part, reading's very minimal, sometimes not at all. Note taking consists of mostly handouts. There's really not really note taking involved in secondary education. And when we look at practicing, there is really multiple chances to complete assignments. So you get many chances to actually complete your assignment, even though sometimes those might be late. You still might have a second chance of getting into turn in the assignment. And many reviews and practice exams really help you to practice this information to continue and to get better and better. When we talk about assessments, and assessments are really looking at how you're gauging the information, how are you learning this information, are you actually learning this information or not? It occurs more frequently. There's many different time points along the way where you get evaluated. This is another way to say it. Get evaluated on your performance. How are you learning the information? And so that occurs much more frequently than you will be, for example, in higher education. And of course, time management, right? Time management is always important. Everybody stresses in education, from elementary, first primary education to secondary education, into higher education. Time management is important, but in secondary education is not as impressed. They really don't stress on that very much in secondary education. Although, again, it's important, and many of your teachers previously have stressed that or have impressed on that, but not stressed it, especially in secondary education. And so when we look at higher education, we really see a big contrast. We see a difference in many of these subsets as far as learning, right? And so we look at reading as it compares to secondary education. In higher education, there's a lot of reading involved, right? Lots of reading. Reading in an English class, reading in a history class, reading in a class like this, right? Science course. Lots of reading involved. When we look at note-taking, we may rely on handouts, and we give some handouts here in this course, but not always. And so we see a difference there between secondary education. In practicing is very limited. There's not much practice involved, nor do we practice a lot during class. And so when we look at reviews, for example, there could be reviews and could be practice exams, but that's not always the case a lot of the times in our higher education science courses. And as far as assessment, it's less frequent. For example, in this course, it's usually 4 exams plus a final. And so that recurs in less frequency than you would see or would expect in secondary education. And as far as time management, it's very impressed. It's very impressed in higher education. Time management is a crucial key to being successful in higher education. Not so much so in secondary education. Again, important, but not impressed as much as it is in higher education. And so the reason why I decided to include this and talk about secondary education versus higher education is that many of you are used to the secondary education type and strategy that you've seen before. And many of you have experienced that, and that's your only education up to this point that you've seen so far. And so many of you jump into higher education and jump into a course like this expecting the same experiences that you had in secondary education, and come to find out that they're many times completely different or opposite. And so that presents a challenge. That presents a challenge to a student, for example, that is expecting one thing from their previous experience and getting something completely different. And so I wanted to really present this to you so that way you can really think that a lot of times it's not your fault. When we start talking about studying and performing and taking tests and doing well, a lot of times it's because you have an experience, for example, in secondary education, that's not going to be the same experience in higher education, and there's never been anybody that's really presented that, nor have you really stopped to kind of understand that. And so that's why I actually put these 2 slides in there, so that way you do take a step back and understand where you came from and how that's a little bit different in higher education. So having said that, what I want to do is look at some of these things, some of these key points here: reading, note-taking, practicing, assessments, time management, and really look at some of the things that can help you for this course. So we talked about studying, right? And we talked about learning how to study, and this is really what this PowerPoint's all about. But why is it really important to learn how to study? Many of you did not learn how to study. And again, talking about the background that you've come from, many of you have not learned how to properly study, right? And so really, why is this really important, right? Well, for one, it improves student success, right? It improves your success in this course, helps you to be a better student, helps you to actually achieve what you want to achieve. And that's going to be a good grade, right? That's going to be an A, right? That's going to be an A in the class, right? So, of course, better performance, right? We want to get that A. That's where everybody should be at. You should come in expecting that should be an A. And so learning how to study helps you do that. Helps you really to do that. But what are the other reasons why? The skills that you learn to study with, those skills that you're practicing this semester, that you will practice this semester, can be used not only in a science class but other classes. So you can carry this forward. And many of you, if not all of you, are not stopping just at this point. You're not taking this science class and then that's going to be the end of your education. Many of you, if not all of you, are moving on to further education, additional education. And because that's the case, you can use some of these skills that I'm presenting to really move forward and use these to perform better in those classes in the future. And finally, you become a better learner, right? Better learner for life. If you use these skills, they help you to understand that how you can learn with anything you do. And for many of you that are moving on to further education, you don't stop growing. You don't stop learning. That's one of the things that we talk about in education overall, is that you never stop learning, right? You never stop learning. The moment you stop learning, you die, right? In many instances, not physically, but your knowledge starts to retreat, and without knowledge, many of us consider that to be somewhat of a death, right? And so we're always continuing to learn, right? To grow better, to do better, right? But these skills, right? These life skills, right? These skills are super important. These skills not only encompass education, right? We're not just talking about education here, but skills that are really important for everything in your life outside of education, your career, your job, right? Organization, reading, time management, self-assessment. These are all really important things that you can learn by just learning how to study, right? So looking at how you learn, right? What should you learn, right? We just talked about time management, right? Having time management is crucially important, right? Time management helps you not only in your schooling but in your life, right? How to take notes, right? When to study. How to use a textbook, right? When to ask questions, how to ask questions. How do I assess myself? How do we use these assessments? How do I evaluate myself? How do we self-evaluate between exams? How to be a perfect student. What's the ideal student in studying, right? And how to take a multiple guess or multiple choice exam. So there's some strategies here. There's some things that are really important to really help you on learning. So we'll take each one here and kind of expand on this, right? And so the first one we're going to talk about is time management, right? So when we look at time management, I want to start off with this gentleman, right? Ebbinghaus, right? Nathan Ebbinghaus was actually a psychologist in the 1800s, and Nathan Ebbinghaus actually looked at retention, right? Mental retention, and this is a fancy word to say, fancy way to say when you actually learn something, is that learning retentive? Are we keeping it as memory, and can we recall that? Can we later on in time memorize the information and kind of repeat that back out, right? And so he was looking at this. He was looking at retention, and he was looking at how this actually occurs and what happens when people learn new tasks and then forget them, right? So he developed this theory called the forgetting curve. And so in this graph, it represents information coming in the form of data, right? So we always look at data, and we always look at information like data, and we put this on a graph to actually interpret it, right? Look at the information and draw conclusions, right? Kind of going into science. But so if you look at this graph, you'll see this green line here, right? This green line represents the information being held in the brain, right? So again, when we learn, we convert what we learn, whether that be learning through reading, learning through writing, learning through speaking, learning through touching, learning through hearing, learning through seeing. Any of these forms of learning we take in, and our brain holds these as memories. Now it can convert those memories into long-term memory, and that's really what you want. You want that memory to stay in the long-term, locked away in the long-term memory, so that way you can repeat that information when called upon. And what do we mean by that? When we evaluate, for example, an exam, you can repeat this information out and get the correct answer, or repeat it the correct way, and then achieve a high performance, that you've actually learned and understood the material, right? And so this graph represents that. So let me just kind of walk you through this graph, right? And so you see on the x-axis, right? So this would be the x-axis. This would be time, which is not indicated for you, but that's time. And on the y-axis here, that's the percentage of data remembered, right? How much of the data, or how much the information that you remembered, from 0 to 100%. 100% is what you actually want, right? You want to try to achieve 100%, which you can see that the graph doesn't even reach that in many instances. But we want to achieve that high percentage, right? Close to 100. And so what we're seeing here is over time, okay? So if we're learning information here, we see that over time, our retention goes down, right? So if we learn something from, let's say, day 1, and then let's say day 5, our retention, the amount of information, has gone down, right? Gone down. That makes sense? Everybody see the dotted line there? Gone down. So I'll erase that again. Again, let's say it's day 1 here to day 5, right? And we see that if we have been presented with the material over time, we lose some of that information. You can see that the information that we retained has gone down, okay? Over time, whether that be 1 to 5 days, 1 week to 5 weeks, 1 week to 4 weeks, etc., etc. And so what this graph really represents is how, depending on how many repetitions, how many times we repeat the same information over and over, we can keep the information almost at 100%. So if we continued to repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat the information, lo and behold, we keep our data remembered up towards what? 100%. That is actually what we're looking at here, right? So what's the takeaway here? What are we trying to understand? What Ebbinghaus's forgetting curve helps us to understand is that it is important that we repeat information. It so happens that when you actually repeat information, the same information over and over again, you tend to retain the information. That's really what we're looking at. So repetitiveness is important. This is where really learning comes from, is taking the information and repeating it over and over again. Now, having said that, that is a very generalized statement right now. That's only talking about, and many of you probably have interpreted it as, well, I just need to read a sentence over and over and over and over and over again, and I'll finally get the sentence and memorize the sentence 100%. Which is true if it was just one sentence. But obviously, this course, a science course, is not just one sentence. It's many, 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 many sentences, many, 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 many data points, many, many amounts of information that you actually have to retain. So repeating it over and over again verbatim does not really work because our brain doesn't hold that information in that way. So how do you actually, become successful in this? That's kind of where we're gonna get to here eventually. So before we do that, I really want to talk about this, right? I'm gonna erase here really quick. I want to talk about this, right? Procrastination, right? How we actually procrastinate, right? So let's look at this one right here, right? Exercise versus studying, right? So how do we exercise? So if I was to tell you, well, we want to exercise, and Kat wants to go out and start to work out, tone my body, gain more muscle, make myself bigger, leaner, lose weight, become more fit, become more healthy, and I want to exercise. How am I going to do that? Am I going to go to the gym in different time frames throughout the week, make a habit of going to those time frames throughout the week? Let's say I go 3 times a week for an hour, and I do that consistently, and over time, could take me a couple months. I've lost weight, I've increased my muscle mass, I've become fit, I can now run 3 miles or whatever, but now I'm, a changed person physically, right? And how did I do that? Consistency, repetitiveness, over and over again. What I didn't do, and what doesn't work in exercising, is to pile everything right in to a Friday, Saturday for 5 hours a day each day and expect me to be fit, right? So exercising doesn't work that way, right? And many of us already know this is true, right? Exercise doesn't work that way. You can't work out on a Saturday night or Saturday all day and then expect us to on Sunday be fit and completely lost weight, muscles, able to run 3 miles if I just did one Saturday out of those, let's say, 3 months, right? It doesn't work that way. So why do you think, for example, that would work, that strategy would work, for example, in studying? Have you ever thought about that? So take some time to really think about that. Why would you think that would work for studying? Why would you think cramming everything before a big exam on a Saturday night or Sunday night, and our exam is on a Monday, would you expect us to perform, to run our 3 miles in our exam? Think about that, right? So if exercise doesn't work that way, Studying does not work that way either. So that's really important. I want you to really think about that, because that's a really big key to understand, is that studying doesn't work that way. You cannot cram information in a matter of 2 days and expect to perform during an exam the next day. It does not work that way. Many students, and this is not just you, many students throughout the history of education in studying have tried and failed this technique. Try to cram everything all together and try to perform and get a good grade on the exam. Doesn't work that way. You won't have good success with that. And many of you have already experienced this before or are currently experiencing this. And so that's really the point I'm trying to make, is that exercising doesn't work that way. So studying doesn't work that way either. There's a big difference between focused and unfocused effort, right? When you're focused and you put in that effort really, really pays off for you. And there's a big difference between that and putting that same effort and it not being focused. Again, many of you understand this throughout your life already, that as long as you focus on something, you can complete the task, and probably complete the task much, much quicker than, for example, if you were unfocused and putting in that effort. It would probably take you much longer, and you would use more time than you would being focused. So procrastination in the terms of focusing versus unfocusing is a really key point to make, because many students really have the good intention of sitting down and really opening up a book or notes, or really trying to putting in the time of studying, and then become unfocused. They can become distracted, they are tired, they're sleepy, they get other stimuli like, cell phones going off, people texting in a busy area, might be at home, children are asking for something, you've got to take your time away from that. So all these unfocused efforts do not actually help. They're unnecessary and they're actually a waste of time. So we'll talk about that also. So when we talk about note-taking skills, we're really talking about how we actually take notes. And many of you do a great job of taking notes, but there could be some additions, some editing to be done with note-taking, right? So first of all, let's take a step back. Why do you need to go to class, really, right? Why is class important? Why can't you just stay home and read the book, download the PowerPoints, write your own notes, and come to class just for the exam? Why is going to class, going to lectures and labs really important? Why is that a crucial thing, right? Well, there's really two things that you get out of going to class, and really two forms of learning. One that we call associative learning, and the other one that we call experiential learning. Okay? In associative learning, this is really learning something new based on a new stimulus, right? And what do we mean by stimulus? Something that actually initiates the learning, right? Gets you to learn, right? What are some ways of a stimulus, right? Well, that could be a visual stimulus, right? And auditory stimulus. Or a tactile stimulus, right? You can see something, you can hear something, you can touch something, you can write something down. All three of these are really important, and they can only be found in a lecture, can only be found going to class, or can only be found in a lab, is actually using these things. So we talk about this in psychology being associative learning. Different stimuli, new stimulus, new information in the form of visual, auditory, tactile, for example, cause new learning. Experiential learning, You're learning through an experience. And what's the experience? The experience is actually going to class. And believe it or not, your brain starts to perceive information, process information differently once you go through the behavior of going to class. And what does that really mean? Getting up in the morning, getting yourself ready, changing clothes, getting in the shower if you shower in the morning, grabbing your coffee, getting in your car, driving to class, getting off, walking to class, sitting down, looking at the PowerPoint. Those are experiences. Going to lab, conducting experiments, dissections, what have you. Experiencing, which what we mean by learning by doing, right? Learning by doing these things, right? So it's a different form of learning by experience, right? Doing stuff, learning a new experience, all right? And so tying these two together is really what class is all about, using these two things. So when we talk about reading and writing, it's a really important concept to look at because you write notes and you also read, right? And so we'll take a look at this here in just a bit. We'll come back to this. Actually, it's a really important idea to actually organize your ideas from the textbook and the lecture PowerPoint slides. This is a concept also that is really important, is to actually grab the ideas from the textbook and the lecture PowerPoint slides and putting them all together, right? Understanding what you're learning, looking at the learning itself and understanding what that means to you, right? And so we'll look at this, these points here when we talk about the do's and don'ts of really taking notes, right? So let's take a look at this slide. I decided to put these two visuals on here, and these two visuals might be representative of some of the ways that you have tried to take notes, right? So if you look at the top one, taking notes, many of you do this, right? Or have done this before in the past, right? Is you highlight everything, right? Highlight everything in the PowerPoints, highlight everything in the book. Everything is important, right? Everything's important. And so it turns into a big old, pink, yellow blob of words. And so really, what is the point? If you're highlighting everything, what is the point of highlighting, right? And look at the bottom here. Look at these notes here, right? The exhaustive notes that this person has actually put into, which is a valiant effort. I mean, there's a lot of time spent, a lot of effort spent, a lot of energy spent putting these notes together. But these notes are way too exhaustive. There's too much information on here for you to migrate from, right? It's just too much information to weed through. And so when we look at notes, it's really important not to rewrite everything or even highlight everything from the PowerPoint slides, right? You don't have to highlight everything. You should not be highlighting. You should not be rewriting every single thing from the PowerPoint. What you do want to write are the important facts, the information that really helps you to explain the topic that you're studying. Okay? The important facts. That's what you need to really write on your notes, right? The important facts, the important information, the highlights, right? Highlighting is to actually highlight important facts and important terms, right? The information that is important to you. And I stressed you because it has to be important to you. Remember, you're vested in yourself, right? You're not using these notes on behalf of somebody else. You're using these notes for yourself. So make them about you. It is about you. These notes are your own personal notes. So whatever information you think is important for you, make sure that you put those on the notes. But again, there's a big difference between everything is important versus certain things are important. So you got to figure out how you can write these notes to make them be about your information, whatever helps you to stick that information down, right? Don't write everything verbatim, right? Not word for word. That's what we really mean, right? Not word for word. This information, for example, on PowerPoints, on slides, on handouts, is the information presented to you, but you have to write your own notes in your own words, in your own language. Everybody's got their own little language that they like to abbreviate with, put down, to explain to themselves how this works. And so use that language. Use what makes sense to you, right? Because again, these notes are for you, right? And make sure you explain everything to yourself. This is a really important task that I stress a whole bunch, is that once you write those notes down, explain to yourself what those mean. Explain what those notes are. Okay? If you're working in a group, which I have strongly suggested that many of you do, right? Okay? You know, group work is really important. Group studying is really important. Individual studying is also important, but group studying is also important. Explain everything to your group. What this topic means to you. What did you just learn? And think of examples that help you understand the topic. Examples like real life situations, real world kind of applications, real world kind of examples. Break it down to yourself. Generalize it. Break it down to simpler terms that you understand. Not that everybody else can understand, but that you can understand. Examples help to tie the relationship between what you're studying and what you've experienced before. And that is actually another key of how you can actually how you can learn things and convert that into long-term memory. Okay? And I can't stress this last point enough. Abbreviations and pictures are a must. Are a must. Abbreviate things, but make sure that you understand that abbreviation. Because again, those are your own notes, so your own abbreviation is your own language, if you will. And pictures are really important. Pictures help to visually understand the written words in your notes. Look at these two great examples that I have on this PowerPoint. On the left, we've got this student that wrote down, or actually drew out and wrote down all of the interesting anatomical and some of them physiological features of the cardiovascular system, and really the heart and the great vessels, right? So we see the heart in the middle, and we see these great vessels, right? These tubes, if you will, bringing in blood to the heart and then taking blood away from the heart. And look at how this person really labeled this together, right? Put this nice little picture, drew it in their own drawing, and labeled this in their own way. And lo and behold, if you do that, if you can actually do these pictures, can actually create these pictures, and they don't have to be as perfect as that. That's a really nice picture. Believe me, I'm not an artist myself. But if you can put this in your own drawing and put your own abbreviations to it or your own labeling, it goes a long way, right? Look at the picture on the right. What they're looking at is really looking at the phospholipid bilayer, right? Plasma membrane, right? It's that little membrane that is actually the barrier or the border of a cell, right? And so they're studying what that border is made up of, and you can see that they're talking about the phospholipids there, and then at the bottom there they're looking at the different types of proteins that you find in a cell membrane, right? And what they actually do, what's their function, how do they behave towards the cell, what's their function. Look at their nice drawings, right? Look at the drawings there, the outs, the ins, what each protein does for the cell, brings stuff in, changes stuff around. etc., etc., but in their own words, in their own drawings. So I decided to create this for you, right? Looking at a schedule, as I mentioned for some of you previously, of how when should you study? What's the time frame? Because this is where students struggle the most. This is where many of you really have a hard time gauging, right? And so I decided to create this for you to look at really a schedule, right? Now, if you look at this schedule, you'll notice that this schedule is, you know, in a certain time of the week. And so this is just a generalized sample of it. This schedule can be adopted and changed as needed, right? So some of you will do that. It just depends on, number one, when you have your classes. Okay, when do you have this science class? Where's your other classes falling in here? And what is your personal life, right? What's going on outside of school, whether that be schoolwork, a family, children, schoolwork and children, etc., etc. So this can actually be moved around, can be customized depending on your own personal schedule. So don't look at this as an absolute. This is how you need to frame it for your week. You're going to have to adjust it depending on what you have going on in your own life, right? But I put a typical, I put down as an example a typical anatomy physiology student, right? This anatomy physiology student is taking their class on a Tuesday and a Thursday, and they're taking their, for this, our example here, they're taking their lab on a Monday, right? Got a Tuesday, Thursday lecture and a Monday lab. And I put down the time frame that they're in class and the time frame that they're in lab in the form of minutes. So bolded in red is the class time, the lecture time, and the lab time, right? And so in this example, you can see that they are studying 5 days a week, right? And they're studying before class, after class, and the day after class, or the day in between classes. And so when you look at this, you've really spread it out, the time that you need to study amongst the 5-day week here in a typical week of the semester. And that's really the key to actually studying. Not only how you're writing the notes, attending class, and why that's important, going through the behavior of attending class, but also how you space out, how you parcel out this time in a week to study, right? You'll notice that times vary, but it's usually about 30 to 60 minutes a day, okay? About half an hour to an hour of studying. And again, that can vary depending on how much information is presented to you that week. So we can actually increase this, and I don't want you just to stick to this 30 to 60 minutes. If you feel like you need to put in more time, then you might double this, right? It might be 60 minutes to 120 minutes, okay? A day, right? So that can also vary as well, depending on how much information you need to get in, right? But the whole point being that before class, immediately after class, and the day after class is something that you really want to stick to. So let's kind of look through each of these days, right? So notice that before class, okay, we've got notes and homework. So let's take Monday, for example. Monday, we've got lab there, took a lab. After class, we'd write notes on that lab, 10 to 15 minutes, maybe do some homework for 10 to 15 minutes, or read if you want to read through that 10 to 15 minutes. And then on Tuesday morning, we've gone through class, and immediately after class, We'd write notes for 30 minutes, do our homework, or do homework on that's been assigned, and maybe read, or you can switch that around for 10 to 15 minutes. And then the next day, which is Wednesday, falls right between the Tuesday, Thursday lecture. There is a bit of notes, some reading, and if you notice, there's a blue section there. There's a break implied in there, right? There's a break included into that section there to allow you to actually take a break, and we'll talk about breaks here in just a second. Then some homework and some notes. Class again. Notes, homework, reading. And then the day after, notes and homework. Right? So we spaced out our studying, and we've actually stuck it before class, immediately after class, and the day after class, all in the span of 1 week. Saturdays and Sundays can be devoted for a little bit of work, a little bit of studying if you want. But if you notice, that can also, Saturdays and Sundays can be open for work, for example. If you have to actually work, or if you are working, you can work, or spend time with your family, you can spend time with your family. And then during the week, you can parcel in this time. Many of you are already doing this. I see many of you have talked to me before and said, hey, this is how I organize myself, because I've got, I work full time and I've got kids and, I've got a family, so I need to kind of put in the time this way. So many of you are already doing that, so congratulations if you're doing that. But some of you are deciding to, squash in study time Saturdays and Sundays for hours and upon hours, which is probably a recipe for disaster. If you'll notice, the time frame here for many of these says 10 to 15 minutes. Because, and there's a big reason why, because many of us, and we've taken research on this, there's been research conducted, many of us can only have an attention span for about 10 to 15 minutes on one particular topic. Whether that be, studying anatomy and physiology. Most folks, most people can only have an attention span for 10 to 15 minutes. And after that 10 to 15 minutes, we begin to become unfocused. And when we become unfocused, we actually will not pay attention. And so that's why we see notes and homework, because we kind of actually change the stimulus, right? Talking about stimulus. We change what we're looking at. Instead of writing notes or reading notes, maybe we've now gone online and done some homework. Or instead of doing homework, we've actually gone and read the book, right? Looked at that. And so on and so forth. It's really important to do this, right? Now, before we go to the next slide, I want to mention that if you have time before class, before you get to class, it's a great opportunity to actually either open your notes or open your book and to start rereading some information or writing some notes down. That's a good opportunity for you to do that. And that's considered before class also. Not only just the night before, but right before class. And understanding that some of you have a class before, and that's totally fine. All right. So how do we study for the notes that we take, right? Lo and behold, if you just read the notes, just pure reading of the notes is really a really guaranteed effort, a guarantee to actually make a C or lower. And that's really how we look at it. If you just read your notes, is guaranteeing for you to make a moderate or below average grade. And so it takes more than just reading notes is what the point is, right? Many of the times, rewriting notes are crucially important. So if you rewrite a note, okay, which I strongly recommend you do, you don't need to rewrite notes verbatim, okay? What you do need to do is rewrite the notes from scratch without looking at the notes. And those notes are going to be completely different in many instances. They're not going to be verbatim. They're not going to be the exact same words. So this is not memorization of words. This is not memorization of sentences. It's memorization of the topic and the information, the understanding really of the information. So if you can rewrite your notes from scratch without looking at them, it forces you to actually self-explain the topic, right? Whatever topic you're looking at. So if you can rewrite those notes and cover the points of those notes in your own words again, that reinforces the concept of those topics, right? It also is a big identifier for you on what you know and what you don't know, right? What you know and what you don't know. And it also prevents you to have self-deception, right? To actually look at things and say that you understand them completely and move on, right? It helps you identify that possibly based on what I rewrote without looking at my notes that I've missed a lot of stuff, right? So we call this self-deception. It's the process of actually when you read notes and saying, okay, I got it. I'm pretty confident I understand the material, and then find out that you didn't catch any of that material. That's self-deception. And so it prevents that, because if you can assess yourself, and this is what we're doing, we're assessing ourselves. We're taking a test. We're taking a quick self-evaluation of the information, and that's what rewriting those notes from scratch does. It tells you, okay, this is what I know, and compare them with those notes, and this is what I missed. This is what I don't know. This is what I need to study more. This is what I really need to kind of focus in on. Okay? So it helps you to engage. It engages that information there over and over again. Talking about Ebbinghaus, right? Forgetting curve, repetition, right? Correct those those errors from the scratch notes, right? So if you messed up on the scratch notes, if you rewrote the notes and you missed a lot of information, or you missed some information, or I said, oh, I forgot to include that portion or that definition or that word there, correct those errors on the scratch note itself. Take another pen if you want another color and correct those, right? And rest. It's really important. That 10 to 15, 20 minutes is a really important time frame, right? Because again, attention span, right? So practice this rewriting notes from scratch without looking at those notes only for about 10 to 20 minutes, and then take a quick break, right? Take a 5-minute break and then start again, right? And you can do this over and over again, right? Over and over again. You repeat it until you're 100% comfortable with the information. Gives you an endpoint, gives you a goal. And then after that, when you feel 100% comfortable, move on to the next topic. That's how we actually can understand and help some, give you readiness, give you a sense of, I understood this information. And this is why, because I've proven myself I've done that. I can see it black and white, for lack of a better word, right? Lack of a better statement. I can see it in front of my face. I know that I did it correctly. I know that I understood it correctly because I could repeat that. I could rewrite that information. All right, so let's talk a little bit about preparing for an exam, right? How do we prepare for an exam, right? So 5 days before an exam is the ideal time frame to start preparing for an exam, right? And many of our instructors, including myself, give you at least a week notice, which is, way beyond that, time frame of 5 days. It could be 7 days or 2 weeks. There's a 5-day notice at least to get started for the exam. So starting to prepare for an exam 5 days in advance is really key. A week is best. So 7 days from the exam is the best, right? So, try to stress for that. Once you're starting, again, time management, organization is really important, looking at these kind of things, right? And so we're going to up the time frame, right? How many minutes we spend here. It's usually between 30 to 90 minutes a day, right? And this should be really used as a review, okay? A review. We're reviewing information. We're not learning new information, okay? Even though there might be a lecture right before, a couple days before an exam. Again, that might be learning information there, and you might have to put some time in learning that information. But the rest should be a review. This should be a review, not learning new information, okay? So if you took notes, if you're putting in the studying between those times throughout the weeks leading up to an exam, then this should be a review. Okay? If you haven't practiced those, then this is not going to work for you. If you've only wrote notes down or printed out PowerPoints 3 weeks ago, not looked at them since then, and then want to prepare for an exam, you're still at the learning phase. You're not at the review phase, because that's new information still. Even though you did write it once and look at it once, that's still relatively new information. Because it's still relatively new information, you have to learn that, in 5 days. And plus, you have to learn all the other information from that week all the way to up to the exam, which, looking at the nature of how the brain handles memory, doesn't work, because you've overloaded yourself, and all that information, a lot of that information will not be retained, and it's a recipe for disaster. So remember the curve here, the forgetting curve, right? Repetitiveness is important. You've been repeating this information throughout the several weeks leading up to the exam, a week before, and so you've retained this information. And remember, you're rewriting notes, you're correcting yourself, getting really comfortable throughout these weeks. And understand that retention is there. Understand that the process scientifically in the science shows that retention is there. You're actually held on to that information, because during this week in a review, you're going to recall this information, right? And then you're going to take assessments. You're going to take assessments in the form of testing, right? You're going to test yourself out. You're going to undergo practice exams to see how much of this information you actually really did put in, how much you did retain. Now, there'll be some places where you didn't retain that information as much, and those are the places you want to concentrate on throughout this week. And so looking at the schedule here, you see the exams on Thursday here for our example. We still got a Tuesday lecture here, okay? And we see the schedule here in green, excuse me. Sunday, we took a self-test. We read some information on Monday, took another self-test on some chapters, looked at some notes or rewrote some notes here on Tuesday's lecture. After class, took a self-test and took another self-test, right? A lot of self-tests and reinforcement to really gauge that information, right? So looking at focusing, how do we do this, right? Right? Many of us have been in this situation up top, right? So you look at the meme there, if you will, right? Many of us have blanked out. It's kind of zoned out, if you will. Even though we're sitting there for 30 minutes, 60 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, and nothing's falling in, right? So don't study if you're not focused. If you feel unfocused, close the book, do something else, close the notes, do something else, close the PowerPoint, and do something else. It's useless for you. It's a big waste of time if you're not sitting there and focused in studying, right? So you have to identify this. You have to really realize that if I'm sitting there for hours on end and I'm not focused, if I'm staring blankly at the notes, as the meme indicates, if I'm carrying on talking, or if I switched on the TV and now watching an episode of, whatever, I'm not focused. And so what's the point of actually having that book open and saying that you're studying when you're really not? None of that is going to be retained. So it's a big waste of time. Close the book and actually watch TV if that's what you're doing, or do something else, because that's time better spent than sitting there and opening up notes and not remaining focused, right? By remaining focused, you can actually save time that can be used for more important things, right? That's what we're talking about when we split up those 10 to 15 minutes, 30 minutes breaks in between types of studying, as opposed to sitting there for 3 hours and 4 hours when you're not focused and you lose focus, right? Break it up, and also piece out times where you can be focused, when you're rested, when you've slept, when you've eaten, when the kids are asleep. Those are the times when you can be focused, and you know those times. You got to figure that out in your own life. You got to figure out where those times fall in, where you can actually remain focused, right? A little bit goes a long way. So time does, the quantity doesn't really pertain here, right? If it's 3 hours of unfocused work, that probably doesn't relate nearly to 30 minutes of focused, undivided attention to the task. You probably put more time in studying and more knowledge into studying, gaining more knowledge into studying for 30 minutes than you did in that 3 hours of just, staring blankly at the notes there, if you will, right? So use your time wisely, right? Save time, focus in that time, and then you'll save time for your Kegs 10, as that girl shows, right? All right, so how to use a textbook. Many students really struggle with this. They don't know how. They bought this big old fat textbook for, a lot of money, and have never cracked the book before, or don't know how to use it. How do I gauge this information? Do I need to read it cover to cover, right? And the answer there is no. You don't need to read a book. You don't need to read a textbook from cover to cover, from page 1 to page 1,000, right? So what do you use this textbook for, right? Well, for number one, for preview, right? To preview the information. And what do we mean by preview? Pre means before viewing it, right? Before looking at it, before discussing it, right? So what do you do, right? Previewing gives you a roadmap, right? Gives you a lay of the land of what you're going to be discussing in class, what's going to be covered, right? And that's what you do before class. You actually read this textbook and look at this textbook as a preview, right? How is it organized? Where are the learning objectives? What am I supposed to get out of looking at this particular chapter or this particular section of the chapter, right? Read it like a story. Don't read page to page, chapter, beginning of the chapter, the end of the chapter. Look at it as a story. Look at the learning objectives. Look at how it's organized. Look at some of the pictures. Read a little bit of the sections. Start to paint a story. Tell yourself a story of what's going on with this particular topic. We are talking about the cardiovascular system as an example. We are first starting to talk about the heart. The heart has anatomical structures. It's located here, and it's found there. It's got tissues surrounding it, and they're called this. And as we go further in, these layers of tissues form these chambers, and these chambers are called this, and etc., etc. And you walk yourself through this little story. Some of that might have required us to read a couple sentences, a headline, a section of the book, looking at the learning objectives to really get that story. But that's really what we're looking at for the preview, right? Don't be like this person to the left here in the picture, right? Probably read Many of those books already, writing exhaustive notes and really burning yourself out, right? This information reading cover to cover does not work, right? But you do need to read, right? Reading is important, but be selective in your reading, right? Don't just open the textbook and start reading line after line after line, right? The textbook's also used for a review, right? When something doesn't make sense, it's a wonderful reference to go back to and reading up on that section. So this is where you actually have previewed the section, previewed the chapter, let's say, or the section of the chapter, gone through the lecture, gone through the lab, and now what you've done is identify places that probably needed more information, needed for you to gather more information because you didn't quite get the whole entire picture. You would go back to that textbook and actually open up that section and do read that information, do read that section, do read that stuff, right? But read that section and only that section, and take notes on that section in your own words, okay? It's really important to put your stuff in your own words. Write information in your own words, right? Make sure you title that. Notes from section 5 of cardiovascular system, cardiac conduction system, whatever, using that example. And we'll go ahead and take those notes. Read that section from the book and write those notes. Ask questions in class, right? They're really important. Don't let complex topics really confuse you, right? When you're reading, when you're going through notes, when you're trying to understand this information, break it down into simpler terms. Many of your questions arise because you've looked at the term and thought it was too complex and said, you know what, forget it. I don't understand it. I need to ask a bunch of questions about this. But if you take that complex information, understand the words, and break it down into your own simpler terms, you've answered many of the questions you might have. But if you do have a question, ask it in class, right? It's really important, right? Remember, you're not the only one that doesn't get it. There's many students sitting there that don't get it either. Be a hero. Be the person to stand up and say, hey, I have a question. I want to know about this. I'm confused about this, that, and the other. Can you please explain it? Remember that you're not only doing this for yourself, you're doing it for others too that might not have might be too shy to actually ask that question, right? And when we're out of class, when we're not in a lecture, make a list that you don't of things that you don't understand, right? Those might be some that you can address. So if you have questions on there, make a list. Write those down. Try to answer those from the list. And if all else fails, contact me, right? If they're a simple question, you can email those to me. If it's a complex question, and you'll know if it's a simple or complex question. If it's a complex question, make sure you visit me. Make sure you ask that question, right? How do we use practice exams, right? Practice exams are really important because they actually help you gauge, right? Not only the information, what you know and what you don't know, how you're doing with your studying, but it also are good examples of what kind of question or what structure the question is going to be on the exam, right? So I don't actually take questions directly from practice exams, and that's not what they're used for. You cannot study the question and expect that to be on a test exactly verbatim. That's not how that works. But how they're structured, how they're put in multiple choice or multiple guess are a good way to actually practice, right? Use them for what they're designed for, practicing, right? So again, we can relay this to a sport, right? How do you actually get better at a sport? How do you get better at baseball? How do you get better at doing that? You swing the bat, right? You practice, right? You pitch. You throw the baseball, you throw the baseball, you swing the bat over and over again. Practice and practice. Okay? Practice exam questions are found at the end of this chapter in this book and on My Mastering, right? So we use My Mastering as a homework study guide area, but also in the study area, you've got these practice exams for all these chapters. Use those. Those are really important. Those practice exams are there for you and in the back of each chapter or during or after each section. So use them. So here's our well-organized and studious student that hopefully by the end of this PowerPoint you're going to be, right? And looking at this, right? What they do the night before class, during class period, after class, the day after class, on the left side, and what they do to prepare for an exam, right? Notice how they've sectioned this out, right? They put this together. So use this. This is a really important tool. So please use this as a guideline for your studying, right? Not only studying for, on the weekly basis, but also for an exam, right? This is how this is the recipe for success, right? This is how you actually do well in this course. Actually do this. And I want to point out before we move on, because I won't read all this, right? But look at the week before the exam, night before exam, and day of exam, right? This is really important. I want to mention this, right? Eats a decent breakfast, right? That's really important. Fueling yourself, preparing yourself with fuel, energy to conduct an exam, which is stressful, strenuous, right? Time consuming. A lot of energy gets put in an exam. That's really important. I can't stress that enough. Many of students throughout the years have, come in, not eaten breakfast for an exam, haven't rested, haven't slept, haven't go to bed early the night before, crammed, and expected to perform well, which doesn't work, right? If you've done all this, all of this stuff, you won't panic, right? You take an exam, you've practiced enough, you feel comfortable with the information, 100% comfortable, and you'll do well. And lastly, go out and celebrate. It's really important, right? For your sense of well-being, for your mental capacity, for your mental wellness to really go out and celebrate. Celebration is really important. So once you take an exam, celebrate that you actually did well, that you tried your best, that you felt confident with the material. That's really important, right? Work hard, play hard is a mantra that at least I live by, right? And you should too. So how do you take an exam, right? Multiple choice exams require some strategy, right? Try to answer the question before you read the answer choices, right? So read the question and try to answer it yourself. Lo and behold, if you answered it correctly, or if you answered it and then check the answer keys or the answer selections, and if it matches up to your answer, more than likely it's the correct answer. Okay, so there's a bit of strategy there, right? Eliminate the obviously wrong choice, right? So answer the question and look at the answer choices, right? Some of them are obviously wrong. If they're obviously wrong, scratch them out. Physically take your pen, and scratch the whole letter and the choice completely out. Okay? Process of elimination, right? Which of those question options are the most accurate? Out of all of them, what's the most accurate? Because many of them can be correct, but which one is the most correct is the one we're looking for, right? Are all parts of the question true? Right? So if the question asks, for something, is all of it true? So you should be checking your exam at the end of the exam. And this is going to take a bit of practice, right? You're going to have to time yourself. And there's the reason why I have an exam that's timed, that you have a timer, because I really want you to look at the time frame. It's about keeping yourself organized as far as time. Time management is also important in an exam, right? Try to allow yourself 10 minutes at the end of the exam to really check any of the answers that you answered, right? The purpose of that is not actually to change any of the answers, but find mistakes, right? If you found a mistake, you can correct the mistake. That might be changing an answer, or it might be looking at the exam and said, oh, I put the wrong letter, right? I might be making a mistake. So those 10 minutes are for reviewing the entire exam, right? And it's also used to actually read the question, right? You would read the question with the selected answer to really verify, hey, that is the correct answer, right? So I've included a website here that really talks about test taking and going through a multiple guess exam and actually how you do that. So there's more information there on that website. So I recommend that you look at that website. All right, so we're towards the end. I hope this really helped you guys out. I hope it really kind of helps you to reset and reorganize how you study, and how actually you learn how to study, how that's really important, and how these skills are something that you can carry on, not only for studying in future courses, but actually how you keep well organized, right? It's all about organization, time management, and actually the strategy of actually, learning how to study. And I hope this really helped you out in learning how to do that. I really want you to practice this, to really change the way you're doing this, right? Change the way you're studying, change the way you're actually addressing this information. And lo and behold, if you break it down the way I offered it to you and some of those strategies, I think you'll really see a really big improvement in your grade. And again, these are things that you can carry on. This type of strategy is really, something that you can actually use for all of your courses. And, as you continue to learn, because we are lifelong learners. Do not forget that. You are a lifelong learner. You're always going to be learning. And anything that you learn, this is really how you can address it, right? Might not be a book that you're learning from. Might be a training from for a new job or a new position. These skills are really still quite important, right? So I want to leave you with that, right? And so I really took a lot of this from Dr. Wayne, Chad Wayne, from a conference I recently attended. So I wanted to kind of give him credit. Big thanks. A lot of this was taken in spirit from some of his information that he presented. So I wanted to give him credit. He works at the University of Houston, Department of Biology and Biochemistry. So special thanks to him. All right. Thank you, guys. I hope you have learned a lot. Please let me know how this worked out for you. I welcome any comments or any critique for any of this information. All right. Thank y'all.